1, 2, 3, funky.
This is the story of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of the story is real. This is a picture of Margaret, and she had just graduated the 8th grade, and she decided that she wanted to get some babysitting gigs. This all takes place in the summer of 1974, and Margaret lived in Burlington, New Jersey. Margaret put out her phone number looking for these babysitting gigs, and on June 19th, this guy by the name of John Marshall called her asking for her to babysit his 5-year-old son. The job was in Mount Holly, New Jersey, and Margaret's parents were kind of weird about it because she was only in 8th grade and she'd be traveling to a different city. But she gave them John Marshall's phone number, so they were okay with it. John had some babysitting stuff set up for her on a weekend, but he postponed it 3 times. Eventually, he called her again and said this time it was for real and he would pick her up in a red Volkswagen. Margaret told her parents that she would call right when she got there, but no call. A few hours went by and still no call. And she was supposed to be home at 2:30, but then she didn't show up. And then hours went by and she still didn't show up. Part 2 coming now. Part 2 of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of this story is real. So Margaret is missing and they have not heard from her. So they use the phone number that she left them and it starts ringing. A lady picks up and Margaret's mom asks, is somebody by the name of John Marshall there? And she's like, there's no one here named John Marshall. And the lady hangs up on her, and so they start freaking out again. So they call the phone number again, and yet a different voice picks up this time. And so it turns out that phone number is the phone number of a payphone outside of a store. It was all so suspicious, but then they found out that the manager of that store, his name was John Marshall. One of the cops actually knew this John Marshall, and he said, it's not him, trust me, he couldn't have done it. And so they quickly just ruled him out. Once the media got wind of what was going on and spread the news, a lot of other people said that they also got the same call from a guy named John Marshall for fake babysitting gigs. This goes to show that this was no accident, no coincidence, and Margaret was targeted. Last part, part 3, coming right now, and yes, it has the phone call in it. Part 3, the last part of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of this video is real. So Margaret was still missing. It was clearly not a coincidence. She was targeted by this guy going by the name of John Marshall. Margaret's parents have no idea where she is. They are worried sick, and the only way that they had to contact her was the number of that random payphone. Which I don't think is such a coincidence, but you can decide that in the comments. But one night, Margaret's parents are just sitting around the house and they get this phone call. It is from a man who is supposedly connected with the whole Margaret thing and demanding $10,000 to save her life. Here's the phone call.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topic.
Who is it?
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topic? Who talks like that? Also, this is what scientists think that she would look like now, but we don't know. Now Margaret would be 60 years old, and if you think you know anything or recognize that voice or see a woman that looks like this, call this number right away.
The Mysterious Disappearance of Rebecca Coriam, Part 2. Basically, Rebecca was a worker for a Disney cruise ship, and she disappeared one night without a trace, and Disney's covering it up. Basically, what I said in my last video is that Disney lied to Rebecca's parents, and they edited the CCTV footage of her. Why would they do this, you may ask? Well, how bad would it look if one of their employees died on their cruise ship? The captain lied and said that Rebecca was just washed away by a big wave from a storm that night. Well, guess what? There was no storm that night. A worker on the Disney cruise ship that actually knew Rebecca said that Disney knows exactly what happened. They have CCTV footage of it. They're just refusing to show anyone. He went on to say, there's CCTV footage everywhere. How did they not know what happened to Rebecca after that phone call? So basically, it's thought that Disney knows exactly what happened to her. They're just covering it up so that they don't damage their reputation, which is super messed up. I just hope that one day we can get justice for Rebecca.
Hey, welcome to your daily True Crime Minisode. Today we will be discussing the disappearance of Jorge Alberto Sanchez. In 2018, Jorge was a 27-year-old father from El Paso, Texas. Jorge had never left El Paso since he was a child, but that would all change when he accepted a temporary job in Hobbs, New Mexico. He is incredibly hardworking and he's willing to do anything that he can to provide for his family. According to the Charlie Project, he left home on June 20th to start his new job. That night, he spoke to his wife on the phone and told her how much he missed her and the kids and how he wished he could go home. Sadly, this would be the last time that anyone would hear from Jorge. In the summer of 2018, 27-year-old El Paso native Jorge Sanchez accepted a temporary roofing job in Hobbs, New Mexico. According to the Help Find Jorge Sanchez Facebook page, he was last seen leaving work on June 21st. A family member sent him a text message, but the only answer they received was an automated message that said, "Read." According to the Charlie Project, on June 22, 2018, at 7:30 in the morning, a truck driver spotted a man near Highway 190 signaling for help. Although he did not stop to help, he did call the police and told them what he saw. 2 hours later, the police arrived, but the man was no longer there. They did, however, find his car, which had run out of gas. It was found unlocked with his belongings still inside. His cell phone, his wallet, and all of his identifications. 27-year-old El Paso native Jorge Sanchez goes missing after his car runs out of gas. Sadly, this is all the information we know about his disappearance. His family continues to look for him and for answers as to what could have happened. His aunt told Hobbs News that he was an incredibly good man, he was not affiliated with any gangs, and he didn't even drink alcohol. His family does not believe that he left on his own accord. His aunt says that he would talk about how difficult it was to grow up without a father, and that he didn't want his kids to grow up without their dad. You can help in the search for Jorge by sharing his story and his missing persons poster. You can also follow the Facebook page Help Find Jorge A. Sanchez for updates and more information. I send Jorge and his loved ones so much love and light, and I hope he returns home.
Okay, this is one of the most interesting true crime mysteries I've ever heard of. On the 4th of July, 1928, wealthy businessman Alfred Lowenstein boarded a plane at Croydon Airport in South London. Little did he or anyone else know that once he stepped foot onto the plane, he would not be returning back to the ground. He was incredibly wealthy and was actually the third richest person in the world at the time. And that is exactly why he was heading back home to Brussels on board his own private plane, along with 6 other people. While the plane was traveling above the English Channel, he excused himself to use the restroom. When he had not returned after quite some time, his secretary went to check on him, knocked on the bathroom door, but nobody answered. He then discovered the bathroom was completely empty, and that something even worse had happened. One of the plane's doors was wide open, meaning his boss had likely plunged to his own death. Please check out the first part of this video, or else you won't understand anything that's going on. At first, both his secretary and others on the plane believed this exact story. The aircraft, surprisingly though, took an emergency landing on a deserted beach just outside of Dunkirk instead of an actual runway. A couple of weeks, a local fisherman was doing his job when he spotted a suit floating in the water. It was Alfred's body. His wife Madeline ordered a private autopsy, which found traces of alcohol in his blood, even though he didn't drink. Despite this, the inquiry into his death concluded it was accidental. This was largely because of the testimonies of the plane's pilot, Donald Drew, and the plane's mechanic, Robert Little. During their interrogations, both insisted that the plane's doors were easy to open, and that it was totally possible that Mr. Lowenstein could have accidentally opened one and fallen to his death. However, these doors underwent many safety tests in the weeks just before the plane's flight that completely disproved this. So maybe he did this on purpose? But the planes couldn't be opened mid-flight, and he was making long-term plans, so this was unlikely. So how did he get out? So maybe Mr. Lowenstein was forced off the plane. The 2 main suspects were the plane's pilot and mechanic, who many believe were either hired or bribed to kill Mr. Lowenstein. However, these men were in the enclosed cabin in the front of the plane, and once the plane was in flight, this cabin could not access the section of the plane that Mr. Lowenstein supposedly exited the plane from. However, the plane's pilot supposedly lived a lavish lifestyle in the years after the flight, which means many to speculate that his fortune was tied to the crime. He died of stomach cancer a few years later, so I guess we'll never know. There is a theory that the plane's door was rigged, or it was replaced with one with looser bolts. This theory claims that this is why the plane actually recorded so far away from an official runway where people could see someone fixing or replacing the door with a secure one. So who was behind it? So who was behind wealthy businessman Alfred Lowenstein's mysterious death? Of course, pilot Donald Drew and mechanic Robert Little are heavily suspected. However, there's also Mr. Lowenstein's business rival, Henry Dreyfus, who is facing a libel suit on Mr. Lowenstein's behalf. Did he murder him to prevent the lawsuit? There was also Albert's business partners in charge of international holdings, Albert Pam and Frederick Sarvesi. After Mr. Lowenstein's death, stock in international holdings skyrocketed because of a mysterious $13 million profit that no one could find the source of. This $13 million matched an anonymous insurance policy taken out on Albert shortly before his death. Additionally, there was his wife, Madeline. It was known the two didn't have good relations, so maybe she was greedy and wanted to get some of his fortune before they could get a divorce. Or maybe the body in the channel wasn't actually his. Maybe he faked his own death and disappeared. He was buried in an unmarked grave, and his wife didn't attend the funeral, so maybe she knows something we don't. Given that this case is almost 100 years ago, it's likely we'll never know.
Today we are doing the disappearance of 21-year-old nursing student Maura Murray. This case was named the mystery of the social media age. On February 9th, 2004, Maura made a distressing call to her friend saying that her sister was having some problems. She also emailed her professor saying there was a death in the family and she needed to take some time off. But there was no death in the family. After dropping some things off at her friend's, Maura got in her car and left. Later that evening, she got into a minor car accident, and it was suspected she was intoxicated but not proven. After this, an eyewitness driving a school bus pulled over and asked if she needed any help while she was on the side of the road. She told him no and he left. And somehow between here and here, according to tracking dogs, she went missing. Her car was found with a t-shirt in the exhaust that had been placed there after the accident. There are different theories. The first one was that she ran off to Canada, which was proven unlikely. The second was that she ran away from the accident and succumbed to the element. The third was that she committed suicide. And the most likely, that she was met with foul play.
This is the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. On September 3rd, 1982, the family attended a football game where one of the sons were playing. Johnny asked to go get some popcorn, which his mother allowed. The parents found him talking to a police officer, which they found very odd. Now they allowed him to stand where they could see him, but again he disappeared and they found him under the bleachers talking to this police officer, which was again very odd. Now Johnny requested that he deliver the paper by himself on Saturday morning of September 5th, 1982. Witnesses say they saw a man asking Johnny for directions. Johnny later told another paper boy that the man actually frightened him. Johnny was followed and then snatched by two men who held him down in an old Fairmont. Police originally thought that he was running away. There was evidence that he was still around. There were sightings and writings that he left behind. His mom learned that the organization that took Johnny had links to the CIA, military, and politicians.